This is my weekly attempt to try to keep myself accountable on the chess program of improvement, despite the fact that I don't get to play any games anymore. It's been a good week or so where I have been able to study quite a bit and do other fun things like get my health back on shape. When I started this show, I did a thing where I would update every week on like what my fitness status was and like how much weight I had lost and the stuff I was doing. And I'm hoping to continue that kind of nonsensical thing in the future, just to hold myself accountable to what's going on. And like I said, this is the first time that I've had time to do that, do any kind of exercise or even eat right since this whole crisis kind of began. So that's really good for myself, and kind of similarly, like time to look deeply at some positions. So what I thought I would do today is first I'll just give a little update about what it is I'm up to. I've been studying some nice games. In particular, I finished this book here, the Nikitin book, which I did the first one before. I talked about a little bit about Kasparov. And I'm starting now Saruwan's book. Really good book called Chess Duels. It was recommended to me by Eugene Perelstein, GM Eugene Perelstein. He was like, oh, you'll love it. And in some ways, it's not as good as just listening to Yasser talk, but there's details in the book about Yasser and about chess that I am definitely getting stuff out of. Most importantly for me, though, I just want to look at one or two classic games a day and kind of think deeply about them. That's kind of my goal now. And sometimes to think about the openings that are used in them. This game is going to be an example of that. So one thing I want to say, I just had an epiphany this morning. I've kind of felt before. Now let me just put it onto a position that's interesting to think about. Let's say here. This comes out of the Carlsbad structure. We've done many Carlsbad structures on the show. And so the thing is this. Last year when I was doing commentary at the junior and senior tournament in St. Louis, what we did a thing where if someone came in from the junior tournament, I'd say, hey, look at this position from the senior event. What do you think is going on? And so a Wonder Liang, very talented young GM, comes in and looks at one of these games, and he says the most hilarious thing, which has a lot of truth in it, which is, he said, oh, this looks like a game from the 90s. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And, he didn't say it as a joke, by the way. He was being very sincere, very, earnest kid in general. He's not going to make a lot of jokes. But, I pressed him on it, and what he meant was that they were playing with plans. And I thought that was really interesting. So, just this morning, I was able to put it into words for myself anyway, where before, when you had, especially back in the day without the computer, you had kind of a cult and mythos around certain players, certain super GMs. In my day, Karpov, Kasparov, those kinds of people. And when you looked at their games, a lot of times it would seem like they were simply playing amazing chess, and there was a narrative, like somebody made maybe one mistake and then they were going to lose. Or sometimes even it felt like, oh, no one's really made any mistakes and it's just because Kasparov's playing, he's going to win anyway. Something like that, like an overarching narrative of what's going on in the game. And without the computer, to kind of show you that in fact both sides are making incredible amounts of mistakes, you can find yourself trapped in a human analysis where you don't see the wrinkles and changes in evaluation in the position. And so one thing that was so hard for me to understand what A Wonder was saying was that, to my mind, you always need a story, right? Like, you need, at the very least, if you don't want to call it a story, you need to call it an evaluation. And in that evaluation is going to be like a whole set of things going on about how you're judging the position. And when you see a position in advance, you're going to have an intuitive sense about what's going on in that position. And sometimes, especially like this playing blitz chess, you still have some evaluation in the back of your mind, even if you haven't thought about it too long. And that's going to be based on various factors and yada yada. So what I came to say to myself today is, like, instead of thinking about plans with a capital P, what's happened in the history of chess over the last 30, 40 years, but especially with computers, is that the P's have gotten smaller and smaller, right? So like various positions happen during the game, and yes, you're going to need a plan, but it's going to be a plan with a small p instead of a plan with a big P. And also, like, the sense of the position, whatever it is that sense is, has to be more plastic, more malleable. Like, you have to be willing to jump and change your evaluation of what's going on in the game. And that jump, the amount of jumps is just going to be more than we thought you needed to make when I was a kid, right? So when I was a kid, you had certain like positions, and there were plans, like Wonder was saying, with a capital P. And now it's a more of a move by move basis where things are really going to shift around. Okay, so I might talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I want to first just get into this position. Let's go back a couple moves. This is this very standard Queen's Gambit declined, and this is in Nikitin's book on Kasparov. And first of all, really good. One of the things I love about the book is that it gives context and indeed story to a lot of these positions. And so it turns out Nikitin and Kasparov knew that Spassky, 1989, was hanging out with Ulf Andersson, and they knew that Ulf Andersson was playing this exact setup, so they had planned what to do against this move order. And the move that Gary comes up with is G4. And this is not only something with prep, but in Gary's whole understanding of how to play against the Queen's Gambit declined, he, in contrast to the prior generations, is really going to be willing to play with his extra center pawn, with that f-pawn, to both constrict Black's pieces, in particular that knight on h5 when it goes to f6. We'll see he's looking to play f3, but also then maybe eventually to get an attack. So here, one of the things, of course, is Nikitin, when you read his notes, he has a sense of narrative. And this narrative, a lot of times it feels like fate. And it's going to sound silly to people who are just coming up in chess now, who are using the computer all the time, but there was a sense when Gary played a move like g4 and then played knight g3 that Black was in somehow kind of fated to lose. That is, his position is shaky and Gary will break through. Well, now we just know that that sense of fate is wrong. But anyways, you read in Nikitin's notes, it's like, oh, he never thought that Gary, maybe one move, he thought Gary like had let it slip. Whereas to me, what we're going to do actually is I'm going to turn on the computer at a couple points, and then we'll see what the computer says. First, I want to say about this position, Black played h6, that my first instinct of this position was that White was clearly better, the more I looked at it, though, I thought it was actually very difficult to make any kind of progress. And the first thing to just notice is that if the knight goes to f5, well, just queen f8, the knight will get kicked. Black wants to play g6 anyway, and then the Black queen returns. So that's kind of the problem that White has. And once g6 happens, then the knight on g3 is not going to be a great piece. So while you guys are thinking about this position, I want to make an announcement. It might seem odd that I'm now streaming on my personal Twitch channel, and the reason that is happening is because, of course, after you watch me, but concurrently, Kostya is covering a tournament, a very strong GM tournament. I might do some coverage of that as well. It's going on from 11 Eastern to 3 Eastern every day. And so that's always available to you to watch. I will be doing some of that myself in the coming days. In any case, that's why I'm on my channel and not the usual ChessDojo channel. All right, so this will be the first position I asked the computer, but I want to just tell you what I think, and then we'll see what the computer says. My sense here was that h3, what Kasparov played, wasn't the strongest, and that, first of all, White needs to recognize that maybe it's not so simple. Let me just say something obvious. Black has no weaknesses, so White's going to come at him like a spider monkey, but as long as he stays stable, his position, I think, should be fundamentally sound. And that's one of the interesting and fun things about this being an Ulf Anderson kind of setup too, that it's ultra sound. Even though, of course, the computer, who knows what the computer's going to say. So the problem I have with h3 is that later we might wish to move the pawn up 2 squares. And we do want to play f3 anyway to take away the square e4 from the knight. So my sense of this position is you can't play f3 right away because e3 is hanging. So it would be to play knight f5, queen f8, f3, and then if he kicks me, we go back, and let's say he goes back. I don't know what else he's going to do. Here we could do a variety of things. Queen d2 comes to mind, the most obvious, but king f2 might be playable as well. So, all right, let's see what the beast says, and what I've done is I've put in past shows I forgot to do it or I didn't do it right, but I got the computer up on the side here. Very interesting, right? Oh wait, so after h3, it's saying knight b6, which is indeed what Spassky says. He's saying not so special for White. Let's see if it likes my knight f5 and f3. It wants knight f5. Well, yes. So it wants knight f5, queen f8. Now it doesn't. Honestly, what it's saying though here is White doesn't have anything too special. What's interesting is it wants knight f5, queen f8, h4, which at least is a little bit what I was thinking in terms of keep the h-pawn available for doing something like that. Another plan it's saying that's very similar to mine is just play queen e2 and then f3. That might even be a simpler way of going about it. Let me check if it sees something wrong with this. What it says it's all right, but it's saying it's worried about h5. h5's not so great either. Okay, good. So I'm just going to say that I think I'm going to claim that I was right on this point. But again, this is just a game that I analyzed on my own, wooden pieces. And one of the great things, actually, of this COVID business is I feel like I've been given the chance, because I'm usually so overwhelmed with studying my own games, given the chance to go back and look deeply at some of these classic games. So what I think that Nikitin and maybe Kasparov as well, Kasparov does cover this game in My Great Predecessors, had the sense that White was much better here, and no, probably only a little bit. Okay, so here we go. h3, knight b6, good move. Queen d2, bishop d7. And let's just say the obvious. If you're going to play all this, queen e2 and f3 would save you a tempo, because h3 is not clearly needed if you are going to play f3. Okay, b3 makes sense to me. g6 makes sense to me. a4 I'm not so sure about. at the very least, a very risky move, because now the b3 pawn is going to be weak. And there is a cool narrative, right? A narrative as to why a4 is a genius move, and that is a5 might become weak, and probably more importantly, at some point we might put a rook on b1 and bust it open with b4. So, is it a good move though? I don't know. And let me say something obvious that's so tricky about this position to me is that black is super solid, and yes, he's got some awkward knights, right? And he got rid of his dark square bishop, which was, usually you think of it as your best piece. But he has no weaknesses, and the white king, he doesn't know where to go, and at some point you're going to play something like f3, and your position is going to be marshy, right? It's going to be marshy. Okay. It's funny, I lived in Germany for a long time, and marshy is some way, in the back of my mind, I was thinking of the word morsch, which I think the marsh is, that our word marsh is from morsch, but just means kind of, the kind of mucky business when you put your foot in the ground and you get that suctiony wet sound coming up. Okay, so let's talk about this. I'm going to say the computer does not have a4 for its first move, and I'm going to say the computer says this is roughly equal. I'm willing to be wrong on this one. Let's see what it says. Yeah, a4 is the second move. Oh, now it likes it. Look at that, man. Look at that, dude. It likes a4. Well, it's changing its mind a little bit, but still, just the fact that a4 is up there, in fact, exactly the way Kasparov played it. That's really intense, man. That's really intense that he got that one right. Okay, amazing. All right, so I was wrong on that one. And to me, it's funny too, because I feel like that a4 move, now we're really loose. So a4, a5, f3. Let me talk a little bit more about narrative, actually. I think is really interesting about a position like this. I'm going over the game, and Nikitin is giving moves like g4 and a4. He's giving them exclamation points. So, you're a passive reader, and you go over the stuff, and you're like, yeah, okay, I'm with you. White's like much better. Or he's winning, maybe, No idea, but you feel good about the white position. And the more I looked at it, I was like, wait a second, this isn't clear to me at all that white is so much better here. And interestingly, Nikitin later points out, Spassky thinks later that his position is at least not worse. So it may be even to be for choice. So one of the beautiful things I think about chess, and maybe this comes from me being in the 90s, is, 80s even, is the idea that you're having a battle of plans, right? And back in the day, it was a battle of, like I said, of plans with a capital P, so like overarching big idea plans that are going to go from the opening to the middle game. And you can kind of talk about that here, but the new way, right, is to say, no, move for move, and especially in a game like this, each side is going to make multiple mistakes, and so things were going to change. You're going to have to readjust your thinking. For example, black makes, I think, a good decision, but a decision that's really going to change the character of the game now, with h5, g5. I spent some time here, actually, trying to make something like king f2 or just something else work. And it seemed to me that it was just too dangerous. Like there was going to be a sack happening on g4, but I'm going to check that here. Yeah, he's down with g5. Makes sense. All right. So you saw it too. The computer's first instinct was clearly better for white. Okay, here we go. Queen d6. Maybe this isn't the best. We'll see. Knight g8, e4. Again, Nikitin gives this move an exclam, and it's certainly part of like the bigger plan for white in this position. Now, going over it as a human, one of the things to see is that I also thought at first that this was winning, but the more I thought about it, I was just like, I don't even know. I don't even know. And the next exclam move that Nikitin gives is this one, Queen F4. And two things about this. One, I'm not sure that white is better in the coming end game, though I'm willing to believe it. But two, I'm really convinced that Spassky should have just played Queen B4. And honestly, it will be really interesting to see what the computer says, but I feel like I would rather, definitely here, rather be black. Keep the queens on and make a simple claim that your king is better than the white king. And at some point, we're not going to take it right away, but at some point you're going to have to worry about the pawn on B3. Okay, so if I'm right on that, we'll backtrack a little bit to see where, if at all, white went wrong according to the computer. But like I said, I think it was Queen B4. No one said anything in the notes, and maybe I'm the total idiot here. Let's try to see what we can see. Wow. Okay. So it's saying Queen F4 is the best move. It is mentioning Queen B4. Let's just go down this road for a second. Queen B4. King F2. Let me just say, from a human's point of view, King F2 is really frightening because at some point we got to worry about F6 happening. So castles. Let's just follow the computer line here for a second. King G2. And the computer gives all kinds of moves, but sure, some kind of thing like Rook A, C8 or Bishop E6. It's changing its mind. Personally, I'm going to just say, I would rather be black here. I would rather be black in this position because, why? My king is better. Or another way of saying is, regardless of who I think is better here, I want to have the queens on. I don't want to have the queens off because I want to get at that king. It's permanently a target. So at least to a certain extent, the computer is saying I was right in that it's now down to 28. But I'm going to go ahead and say I'm not changing my mind. On a practical level, I still want to be black in this position. All right, interesting. Well, Josh is in here. Well, what other move, though? What other move is frightening? I looked at it and I was like, well, yeah, what move is it that's so terrifying here? I couldn't find anything. Like, there was no way to get the queen trapped. You know, there's anytime knight A2, you can either take or play queen A3, or depending on where things are, you know. Right, I don't see a better move than king F2 either. So, like I said with narrative, and Nikitin is just, in my sense of his notes, first of all, he thinks Queen F4 is genius level. Let's see what the computer says about Queen F4. No, he doesn't like Queen F4. Well, now it does. So there you go. All right, it is giving Queen F4, Queen V4. All right. In any case, here's another question that let me just say again, because I'm easily influenced, and I'm reading like the notes, it seems like Kasparov's putting together this amazing game here. And here, after going over it quite a bit, I'm willing to admit that white is a little bit better, but I'm still not sure, especially the way it went down. So black castled, and here actually is a move that I'm going to guess the computer just is not in favor of what Kasparov did. But it's definitely a Kasparov kind of move. So, and maybe this is the kind of move that sets, on a practical level, the rest of the world apart from a dude like Kasparov, where he plays knight CE2. And this really keeps the tension in the position. And, we're going to go from here, and it's going to get really interesting. I think that black is mostly okay. My sense, okay, was that if white just wants to be a lame-o here, he can take on d5, and I don't know how black's going to recapture, but the point would be to say we can hang out with the king on d2 and at least claim that our king is better than the black king. And my sense is small advantage, though Josh will always say in positions like this, he'll say it's equal. He always says that. Or he'll say black will eventually equalize. That's again a narrative of fate, right? Black will equalize. Okay. But I do think knight ce2, whatever the computer says, it's a brutal move to face in a practical situation because it means that white is just going to sit on you and say that your pieces are dominated, especially the knights. It's frightening, though, because this is where calculations are going to come in, because at every move, what white is going to have to think about is f6 after knight c2. f6 at any given move is going to be like really pretty scary. And knight c2, it's a big deal that he's covering f4 so that f6, gf, rook f6 isn't hitting the knight on f4, and we have time for e5. All right, let's just computer check this thing here for a second. Dude, knight ce2, top move, and then h4, Spassky's move, top move. Man, these guys are bringing it. Now, it might change its mind a little bit, but still. Yeah, dude. And let's just see, what does it say about my measly sad move here? ED. Now, Friedel's laughing at it. Okay, it's going zeros, or maybe it's saying it might be giving me a little something something. Yeah, basically it's saying I got a little touch, Interesting, man. Friedel's laughing really hard now. You are confusing me with an eye. Well, I didn't. Well, let me just say, it's a really interesting decision, and one where it's nice to have the computer to tell me I'm wrong, because when I see these positions that are about to come up with knight c2, I get really nervous that like maybe black is not only better, or not only fine, but better. So it's a really interesting thing. Of course, I'm just going it over with my own little set and stuff. I like this move a lot, h4. So, first of all, it's not going to be easy to win the pawn, and white now has a grief. And what's funny is like yes, the knights are funny, but white has some weaknesses, and if black, I feel, can fix the king, like get the king somehow working to do something valuable, then I feel like, yeah, he should be at least fine. So here we go. Knight ge2. The computer might, who knows what the computer say. King g7, but I like the way Spassky's playing it. King d2. And definitely here, Spassky loses his mind here. After which the game will turn. And what's interesting, too, about him losing it here is I feel like this has happened to everybody, where they're in some position like this, and Kasparov is kind of holding all kinds of threats over dude's head, and it's not, he wants to play f6, but as far as I can tell, it's not possible. For example, knight h4, and I am holding it together, I think, right, because if rook h8, I've got this intermezzo. And I'm not exactly sure what's happening, but white, it seems like, is doing good, right? Yeah, it's hard to defend g6 and yada yada. All right, so the question is, though, if dude just plays some move like rook ac8, is he really worse? And for example, if e5, well, we can start doing this kind of thing. And yeah, it seems like really kind of hard to say. In the end, I ended up, it was really kind of hard. Like if, for example, if e5, knight a8, very hard to say. Let's say knight e3. knight c7, f4. In the notes, Nikitin says something like bishop f5 with, for example, there's more than one way white could take, but just as an example, let's say you take with this, and we're going to recapture this way, this knight is coming here. But I was thinking in this position, like, why are we in a hurry? Just frickin' play b6 and make white think about c5. And again, you know, once I dismissed the narrative of Kasparov the Great, I was like, wait a second, this is, at the very least, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. All right. Josh, I agree. It's not an easy edge. Well, the whole thing is an easy edge. I feel like there's no point in this game where white had an easy edge. That's one of the things that I have a problem with. Now, maybe, actually, before I say there was no point, I think it might be fair to say that after DE, FE, that white has an easy edge in that position. I think that might be fair. I don't know, easy, again, not the greatest word. But in any case, I'm going to turn the computer on here, and I'm going to just say, let's say rook a c8. To my eyes, I feel like black is fine. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. Computer wants knight h4, which no one was thinking about because of rook h8. No one was thinking about knight h4. Yeah. I don't even understand. Wait a second. What does the computer say? Rook h8, knight g2, and what terrible things are happening to me here? Let's just say I take with a rook. Knight gf4, bishop d7, rook h1 or c1 or something. Okay, that was something that nobody really talked about, that the bishop, that exchange would somehow be good for white. What I do like about this position, though, at some point you play rook b1. And actually, maybe I'll put it in words. I think the advantage of doing that is you just liquidate your bad h3 pawn. And now you're ready to do something like b4. Yeah, okay, that does make some sense to me. All right, I am going to go through this game kind of quickly, and then I'm going to show a different game that will have the faces. The faces will be wrong. Bishop c2, by the way, is a mistake. But I just want to show this was a crusher. Actually, it's a very beautiful end, so I'll just go through it. But I want to look at a different position that I had questions about. This is famous, by the way, in terms of how to waste a dude when you've got the two pieces. Or the rook, actually, against the two pieces. And this is done. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm also reading this book with Kasparov. And here's a game he played against Karpov back in the day. By the way, you know, everybody knows that Serwan was a great player back in the day, but what I didn't realize until I read this book, I was like, oh, the guy had a super record against the world champions. And so this book is all about Serwan doing great against the world champions. Okay, this is an ancient line. Nowadays, I think knight f6 or e6 first is kind of more the happy thing. But let's look at this position a second. Okay, knight f6. And Serwan gives this an exclam. If knight f6, then knight e5, and sure, white's a little better, let's say. Bishop e7 was weird. So bishop f6, queen e4, castles. Bishop f4, queen a5, king b1. And let me just say, my sense is that white is either much better, something like much better, and definitely much better after black's next move, rook he8. So, I wanted to talk about this position a little bit, both in terms of narrative and just thinking about, well, if I was wrong on the position. So basically, Sarah gives this sensibility, and even kind of laughs about it, that even though white has achieved ostensibly so much, that really he's going to claim that black is still totally fine and solid. And I just totally disagree. To me, this seems like a nightmare. This bishop diagonal, I feel, is amazing. It's very difficult for the knight to move off of e5 without knight e5 landing on you. And Karpov's next move definitely feels right to me, bishop g3. So we're threatening the obvious, and we're also just getting out of the way. Okay, so Sarah plays queen f5. My sense is that both queen e3 and queen e2 are playable. Karpov plays queen e2. And now, here's the move that Sarah really likes, and I'm like, no way, bro. This is not a good move. You are not doing okay in this position. And again, I'm willing to be wrong here. All right, so Sarah plays b5 here. And his narrative is that the king is going to be safe, that you are preventing, c4 at some point. White wasn't threatening right away anyway. And let's just say the intuition of it that I get is like this diagonal is truly unpleasant. But, he wasn't going to mate you right away or anything. Now, my sense is that black probably wants to play knight b6 and say, I'm worse. I'm not lost, but I'm worse. That's my sense. Whereas after b5, I feel like we have got now the much better king. And I totally disagree with what Sarah says here. Like, I do not think black is okay. Now, he gives... Now, Karpov's move, let me just show Karpov's moves first before we talk about all of white's options. Karpov plays rook d3. It's really kind of an attempt, I guess, an attempt to finish black off, where he would like to do knight d2, e4 to d6. That's one of the easy plans that comes to mind. And the first thing that I took issue with what Sarah was saying was knight d2. He said he was going to go bishop d4, knight e4, knight f6, and that after knight d6, rook takes, bishop takes, queen f2. Dude thought he had compensation. I totally don't think he has compensation. And the main reason is this king seems so bad. So, for example, queen d3, I assumed e5, and then I don't know what... I mean, this seems the obvious one, and to me, we're winning. I'm not even going to say clearly better. This just seems to me winning. But the other thing I want to say about this position is, let's say you're not fancy. You're not a fancy pants with knight d2. Couldn't white just say also, hey, let's put the knight in there. You'll take the thing, and what I'll do is I'll just trade off your minors and say, bro, your king is a wreck in this heavy middle game. Aren't you? I'm going to say this to me was either, I don't know, somewhere between a little bit worse and clearly worse. I'm going to weigh it more towards clearly worse. One thing that's, before we look at the options, that's interesting about rook d3, and also looking back a little bit at chess history in my lifetime, is that Karpov was famous for these moves that did not force anything. So rook d3, right, it's trying to keep all of his options open. And also, maybe knight d2 and you don't give up the d4 pawn. So, eventually Sarah not only claws his way back into this game, but is probably much better at some point, because Karpov doesn't force the issue in this game. All right, so again, I think knight d2 is definitely the line that Sarwan says feels totally losing to me, and then also knight e5, some kind of clear advantage. Knight e5 is the kind of move that you don't need any kind of major chess skill to play. Okay, and that was just, I mention it mostly because it's just my first instinct in the position when I was just looking at it, you know, with that before I read any of the notes. Okay, so here we go. Look at that, rook d3 comes up as number 2. Okay, knight d2, and it does not want, let's look at this bishop d4 thing. Bishop d4, knight e4, knight f6. Look at this, oh, knight d6, rook takes, bishop takes. And to be fair to Sarwan, he also mentions e5 here in addition to queen takes f2. So I don't believe in any of it. I don't believe in any of it. Let's try e5. Yeah, I feel like this is totally winning. I don't even know what to do yet or anything, but it definitely feels totally winning. I want us to do say, though, e5 at least feels more sensible than queen takes f2. Yeah, this seems a disaster. Yeah, rook he1, that can't be wrong, right? And queen f2, if you trade everything, you lose the business on e5. I can't believe it. It's like if you wanted to convince me about this position, by the way, if you could get the queens off, then I'm a little bit on your team. Like, I'm not going to say that you're lost, but with this monster bishop on d6 and your bad king, you need to get the queens off pronto. Yeah. Okay, so that seems right to me. And now what I want to do is go back for a second, and I want to check my, let's call it my lame GM move, right? My lame GM move is just to play knight e5 and say I'm much better in that position. Maybe I'm wrong on this one. Let's see. And it wants knight e5. It's actually saying bishop e5 is not so special. Both of them, honestly, feel great to me. But yeah, you're just, look at this. The queen is cut from the defense of her man. She can't come back. Yeah, sure, play a4. This is not hard. This is not hard. Okay, so I have some vindication. Now, the part where maybe I'm fudging myself a little bit is I also thought that that was great. And on a practical level, I still do, but it's claiming here that black might live here. Okay, I'm going to correct myself a little bit there. Not the cleanest cry. Not the cleanest. But, right, the idea of trading everything off and shutting the queen off is going to be, in general, correct. All right, so back we go. And let's look at, it was funny where, because Karpov does, like, he manages to blow this position here. So rook d3, and then knight b6 comes, or excuse me, king b7. I better even get it right. I better, Kraai, you better get it right. I was doing all of this from memory, and this position was so, like, in my head that I didn't even properly, can't even remember it correctly. Yeah. These guys played so many games like this all the time. Okay, so, right, knight b6 happens. I don't know why I didn't know that that was happening. Bishop e5, the computer wants that too. Bishop takes, f6, g4. This all happens in the game. Queen h7, bishop g3, king b7. And here's another interesting point where, from the notes, Sarwan gives the feeling of like, oh, I'm totally fine here. And my sense was, no, bro, you're not okay here. This is not an okay position for black. And I got to that assessment mostly, or that feeling, mostly just on the this fact that the position is still mostly open, and the bishop on g3 is a monster. What's amazing about this game and then the previous game that he played against Karpov is they were both knight versus bishop middle games and then end games where he eventually got a much better position. So it went like this. Rook e1, and dude played the very ambitious a5. Very ambitious a5. And this is definitely interesting. I wanted to play rook e3, open the position. What's interesting actually about rook e3 though is, let's say I go rook e3 and you snip. If I take now, I gotta be concerned about, I better have an answer to rook d2, right? And I can play like queen d2, if king a6. The computer wants rook c1. I just want to say, for my human eyes, I did look at this. Computer's changing its mind, by the way. But I was not happy about bringing the rook to d2. So we go back to this position. I wanted rook e3, but I couldn't make it work because of rook d4, what we just saw. Karpov ends up doing all kinds of funny business with just shuffling around with queen d2 and f3, and eventually, like, if you give black enough time, he is going to consolidate his business. So right, we had queen d2, a4, f3, and then, you know, maybe he's okay. I feel like, though, like, for example, I was thinking maybe what you do is you play a ridiculous-looking move like king c1, and then rook e3, and then you claim you're better. Let's just see this for a second. a4, rook e3. Yeah, this is kind of like what I'm thinking about. And you get the Fischer ending if the queens come off, and if the queens don't come off, you just have like this monster attack on the king with the better minor piece. I'm going to give myself a little props for king c1. The idea, of course, is just that I want to take away d2, and my king, you know, it's not, definitely it wasn't the first move to cross my mind, but like I said, I couldn't make that rook e3 work. And the computer does want to do some weird stuff now with queen g8 and think, I guess, about this, which isn't dumb. What's king b1? I'm not going to play king b1, though. Okay, so let's say this. I want to say this about this position, whereas the previous position, I think my intuition was right, and that Saruwan was nearly toast. At the very least, I have to say that this position, even though I really still believe in it for white, is not that easy to figure out what to do. Like, for example, it's saying f3, a4, and rook e3 again, but white isn't the same problem going to hit me with rook d2. Like, let's say check, and then I hide with the king. Oh, now it's saying plus minus. I guess because of some weird bishop f2 thing. Okay. Oh, brilliant. Okay, so that's an example, actually, of something the computer is onto. And actually, it's funny. Let's just say the genius level of f3. First of all, as a principle, put your pawns in the opposite color of the bishop. And this is a great example where the computer is seeing that later, when I play rook e3, this bishop is going to be amazing. Oh. Now, Karpov does eventually, he goes like queen d2, a4, then f3, but this is so much more powerful. Just because, right, my intuition was at least correct. We want to open the position, exchange the d4 pawn for the e6 pawn, and get either an attack on the king or a Fischer ending if he wants to trade off the queens. Okay, guys, I'm going to end it there. That was really sweet. I'm enjoying it. My chess is coming back. I'm going to start being really pedantic and annoying and like do some like physical fitness updates and other stuff at the beginning of all of my shows. My show is getting moved to Monday at 1 Eastern, but I will be back on the ChessDojo channel next time around. And again, if you want to watch Kostya and David and myself talk about some chess positions where we've got Mamad Yarov and Jeffrey Zhang and some other guys battling it out in this Battle of Seattle that's going on right now. That's going to be 11 to 3 on Eastern Time every day till Friday. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.